Well, good morning. So we're talking about our yearly theme is Lean on God. And this morning, I want to talk about Sarah's journey in the Promised Land. But, one of the things we're going to bring up here is if leaning on God means trusting in God. And that means letting God do things His way, having confidence it's going to work out well for you. Whatever that looks like. And a lot of times in that, what we say is, if I had a clue of what was going to happen, that would make that a lot easier. But the reality is, in the story of Sarah and Abraham, Sarah had a clue of what was going on, and it didn't make it any easier. Because along with that clue, you have all these other things that stack up against you. And it's all those other things that we need to lean on God. So I want to begin looking at the story of Sarah and her journey in the Promised Land. So let's open up to Genesis chapter 11 and verse 30. It says, Sarai was barren and she had no child. How much pain is contained in that one sentence? The previous chapters in Genesis, it's all about the way I would title them if I was going to write the title to them is Families Become Nations. So this guy had these kids and they became this nation. And this guy had these kids and they became this nation. Families become nations. And all these descendants of Noah, after the ark, you have the Tower of Babel and then the people after the Tower of Babel all the way up until Abraham. And they're all having kids and they're all becoming nations. And then about Abraham, Sarah was barren and had no children. That's stand out. That is exceedingly standout statement. In the backdrop of everyone else becoming nations, Sarah was barren. Now she was 65 years old at this point. We can learn that through investigating the text, but she was 65 years old. By the time 65 rolls around, you're pretty much locked in on this is the deal. Now maybe even if they lived older than we do, 65 would be past childbearing years. And she would have been comfortable. I mean, in your younger years, that's a burden to carry. Especially in a time when families are becoming nations and you are kind of isolated. I mean, there was probably other barren women, but you're kind of cursed. You were forgotten. You were left out. You were not able to be what your husband needed you to be. You were less valuable, right? A barren woman had a stigma that, you were cursed by God. However they interpreted that, this is a statement of pain. I went to a conference, I don't know, long time ago now, probably 8 years maybe. It was called Pain and Suffering in the Love of God. And one of the speakers described the Old Testament as the history of pain in the world because it's a history of sin. And he brought up in this story lots of places where there was pain, but this brings that up is Sarah was 65, she was barren and she had no kids, and their hope has long been smothered in reality, their hope of having children. In 1 Samuel 1, 5 through 18, here you have the story of Hannah. And Hannah had no children. And her husband had 2 wives. The other woman had children and she didn't. And it broke her heart so much that she finally got to the point where I'm going to pray, I'm going to dedicate this child to God. If I have one, I'm going to tell God, look, if you give me a child, I'm going to dedicate him to you. He's going to be a Nazarene. He's going to be given to serve in the temple. And that's the bargain she made. And as she's doing this, and as she's pouring her heart out, and the way it appeared to Eli was that she was drunk. It was such a heartfelt appeal to God that he just thought she was out of her mind. But that just shows you, well, what is it like? What was it like back then to be childless? Like, what was that like? In Genesis 30, verse 1, here you have Jacob, Rachel, and Leah was having children, and Rachel wasn't having children. And Rachel's told Jacob, "Give me children or else I die." She was hurting because she couldn't have children. In Genesis 16, once Hagar became pregnant, she looked at Sarai with contempt. So this also shows you, what did people think about someone who couldn't have children? They were cursed. They were contemptible. They were worthless, less than worthless. After years of this condition, you learn to accept the reality, but when after years you learn to accept the reality, but when there are promises given by God that rekindle the hope, followed by 25 years of waiting, it would be easy to not just lose hope, but to have the pain increase and lose hope along with faith in God. So, in Genesis chapter 12, God appears to Abraham. And God tells Abraham, "You're going to become a great nation." Now, after you're 65, and then your husband comes, however that happened, he's like, God just showed me a vision. And he told me I'm going to become a great nation, and through our family, all the nations of earth are going to be blessed, Sarah. And she, after you've already lost the hope, it's been smothered in reality, and then here's this spark. This maybe God still cares for me. And this glimmer of hope for a child stirs in her heart. Something new has happened. Right? God appeared to Abraham. And now they're journeying in faith to go live in a land. And when Abraham gets to that land, God tells Abraham, "I'm going to give all this land to your descendants. Your children are going to be like the stars, and I'm going to give all this land to your descendants." So there's just a little bit of hope in that. And so Sarah is thinking, maybe there's hope. In Genesis chapter 12, just set that aside for a moment. There's a famine. So they decide to move to Egypt. This is 10 through 20. And when they get to Egypt, Pharaoh, who would be one of the more powerful rulers at this time in the world, Abraham says, he knows you're a beautiful woman, and if Pharaoh sees you, he's going to come and kill me and take you. So we're going to say you're my sister. But what ends up happening, here, let me get caught up, the glimmer of hope. What ends up happening is Abraham surrenders Sarah to go become part of Pharaoh's, Sarai, to go be part of Pharaoh's harem. In this text, there is no mention of her being preserved like later on when it happens. She goes and becomes part of Pharaoh's harem, and she's there long enough for Pharaoh to be showering Abraham with gifts, which is kind of another level of that betrayal. Plus, it was long enough for Pharaoh to realize all of the people in my house are God has cursed. So God put a plague on his household. And then later, Pharaoh goes to Abraham and says, "Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? God's cursed." And so they had this big problem. But how does that feel for Sarah? Your husband to allow you to go become the part of another man's harem, to be used that way, and not protect you. If you already felt worthless, this would make you feel more worthless. But in the midst of all that, you see God working to protect her, working to preserve her, to keep her. And, there were reasons for it. I mean, she may have also been part of the harem if Abraham was dead, but they weren't trusting in God. So this is a story about not having enough faith in God. But ultimately, God protected her and struck Pharaoh's house with plagues, and she was delivered from that situation and set free. So now, in Genesis chapter 16, so in Genesis 15:4, God is reaffirming his promise to Abraham. He says, "Then behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, 'This man will not be your heir.'" So Eliezer, who was his house steward. Abraham didn't have any kids yet. He says, "This man will not be your heir, but one who will come forth from your own body, he shall be your heir." So Abraham was told, no, it's not going to be someone you adopt. It's going to be your own child. So this is 10 years later. Sarah is 76. We know that because you can discern that from the scripture. I'm not going to go into details on that. But Sarah is 76 at this point. And God says it's going to be from your body, Abraham. And it seems to me that Sarah draws the conclusion, not from me. God said Abraham. He didn't say me. He didn't include me in this. How can I see Abraham receive this promise he had, which is a great promise? But she excluded herself and said, all right, I'm not the one who's going to be remembered as the mother. Maybe my handmaid, Hagar. I will give Hagar to Abraham. What a sacrifice. She still hopes in God. She still believes the promise. She just doesn't see herself as part of it. And so she gives Hagar to Abraham as a wife. And then Hagar becomes pregnant by Abraham. And Hagar begins looking at Sarai with contempt, and likely thinking, I'm going to become the primary wife, and this barren woman is going to be cast out. Like that seems to be what's going on. So Sarai goes to Abraham. I gave you Hagar as your wife, and look how she treats me. And he's like, she's still in your power. Do with her as you see fit. I haven't demoted you, Sarah. And so you have this turmoil in the home. But it seems to me that this behavior of Sarah seems like she was barren. She gets the spark of hope. And now, 10 years later, it's not me. I'm not part of this. This is a promise to Abraham. And she honored her husband. She wanted to see the promise of God come through, but she just excluded herself from all that. And so in faith, she does this, and it's not right. And the whole thing isn't right. There's no mention of consent by Hagar. They're just doing things. She's a slave. She doesn't have a choice in all this. So this is a little bit of a dark story. Yeah, Sarah didn't believe she was part of the promise. She was barren and cursed, and Abraham will be remembered through Hagar. So in Genesis 17, 15 through 21, Sarah is 90 years old. So this is 13 years later. We know that because when Ishmael was circumcised, he was 13. So 13 years later. In Genesis 17, 15 through 21, God says to Abraham, you're going I'm going to come back this time next year, and Sarah is going to have given birth to a son. And notice what Abraham says here, 15 through 21. Then God said to Abraham, as for Sarah your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and indeed I will give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she will become the mother of nations. Kings of people will come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, will a child be born to a man 100 years old, and Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. But God said, no, but Sarah your wife will bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I will bless him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. He shall become the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you at this season next year. So, Sarah wasn't the only one who lost hope in her ability to have children. Abraham looked at Sarah and said, that's not happening. And we also get another insight. For the last 13 years, they were living as if Ishmael was the one. Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Why? Because he's the child of promise. He's the one God said. He's the one. This is how our hope is going to be realized. This is who our descendants are going to become from. And that means for the last 13 years, Sarah was believing, I'm not part of this. I'm out. And also, Hagar was still in their home. Abraham was raising Ishmael as a son, which means Sarah, he was taken away from Sarah because he was raising this child that didn't have anything to do with her. And so if you think about the family dynamic and the way that that would have played out in life, there's no hope here. And Abraham laughed in his heart. This is not a, that's hilarious kind of laugh, or that's interesting. You know, there's ha-ha, funny, ha-ha, interesting. This is more like, ha-ha, yeah, right. And so God gives a prophecy. We're going to name him Laughing. We're going to name him Laughter. That's your son's name, Laughter. Why? Because he laughed. But more than that, in chapter 18, verses 9 through 15, it says, then they said to him, where is Sarah your wife? And he said, there in the tent. He said, I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah your wife will have a son. And Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. Sarah was past childbearing. Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I have become old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also? And the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I indeed bear a child when I am so old? Is anything too difficult for the Lord? Excuse me. At this point, I will return to you at this time. At the appointed time, I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah denied it, however, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, no, but you did laugh. So, Sarah and Abraham had the same response. Sarah said it out loud. Abraham did it in his heart. Sarah laughed at the Lord, spitefully, right? Same thing. And questioned God. He's saying, I'm going to return this time next year. What is he talking about? That's not real. That's not going to happen. She's not going to hope in God. And what was God's response? Is anything too difficult for the Lord? Are you really going to limit me? That's what his response was. But after 65 years of being barren, and then 25 years of waiting, she's 90, and she hasn't seen God work that in her life yet. It's not going to happen. That ship has sailed. I know who I am. I know where I stand. I know my relationship to the promise. I know my role. That's what she was saying. I'm too old. God can't use me anymore. God's plans for me are over. In Genesis chapter 20, Sarah's taken again by the same lie. So Abraham moves on. So God said this time next year, she's going to have a son. This time next year. So within a year, and if you say this time next year, and it takes 9 months to bring a child, so what happens next? That's really what happens next. Next week, Sarah is given over to become part of Abimelech's harem. Now, if he married her and slept with her, whose child could that child the next year be? That's a major problem, right? And yet, faithlessly, Abraham took the path of a coward again. To preserve himself, he sacrificed his wife. Look in Genesis chapter 20, verse 11. Abraham said, so this is his excuse to Abimelech, but this is his reasoning, okay? Abimelech said, Abraham said, because I thought, surely there is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Okay, it's one thing. Okay, they're going to treat her well probably. That wasn't his thinking. There's no fear of God in this place. I'm going to hide behind my wife. That's what Abraham did. Another betrayal, another cowardly thing. But back up a little bit. Look in verse 3. But God came to Abimelech in a dream at night, in the dream of the night, and said to him, behold, you are a dead man, because you have the woman whom you have taken, for she is married. Now Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, will you slay a nation even though blameless? Did he not himself say to me, she is my sister? And she herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and in the innocence of my hands I have done this. Then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know that in the integrity of your heart you have done this. And I also kept you from sinning against me. Therefore I did not let you touch her. Now therefore restore the man, his wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all that is yours. Here again, you have Sarah put in a very compromised position. And God steps in and protects her. He's her hero. Not her husband, God is. And I like this picture because that's what God is for her. You know, a few chapters prior, Abraham goes to war and defeats 5 Philistine kings and recaptures Lot from them. It's not like Abraham is defenseless. But he didn't do that. He didn't protect his wife. But God does. God does care for her. God ensures that she is pure in order to carry out his will for her. So he protects her in all that. In Genesis chapter 21, look in Genesis 21:1. Then the Lord took note of Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. So Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, and at the appointed time which God had spoken beforehand. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Verse 6. Sarah said, God has made laughter for me, Everyone who hears will laugh with me." And she said, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age." So here it says Sarah laughed. Not from spite, not from disbelief, from joy. From the joy that she was God's chosen to bring forth the promise to Abraham. That she was chosen to be a mother by God. In Hebrews chapter 11, this is the, where the Hebrew writer names all these faithful people. But Hebrews 11, verse 11, it says, "By faith, even Sarah herself received ability to conceive, even beyond the proper time of life, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, there was born even of one man, and him as good as dead at that, as many descendants as the stars of the heaven in number, and as innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore." What is Sarah called? By faith. She is counted as one of the very faithful ones of our forefathers. But was she faithful? She was faithful. You see in her action with Hagar that she was interested in seeing God's promises fulfilled. She believed them. She trusted them. But she didn't trust God. She didn't lean on God. So if we pull back and we look at the big picture of Sarah's life, we can see from the beginning to the end. And if we look at the end, if we look at the spot where God kept his word, she laughed. She was joyful. She spent the last 30 or 40 years of her life a mother. She got to see her sons and grandsons. Like, she lived through all of that. And her faith was, how would we say it? Her faith bloomed in that. It wasn't that she didn't have it, but she didn't trust God. So we go back and look at Sarah's life. A life of pain, a life of rejection, a life of feeling unchosen, feeling left out, feeling less than. You go through all the things that she felt. Abandoned by her husband, hated by her slave, looked down on, barren. She went through all of that without confidence in God. And so we can look at Sarah's life and we can learn something. The first thing we learn is from the very beginning, God chose Sarah to bring forth his promise to Abraham. She didn't live like she was chosen, but she was chosen. Sarah believed she was barren and rejected by God. Sarah suffered much, believing God did not choose her. That's true about us, isn't it? Isn't it easy to hear God's promises, but not to live like we're chosen? Rather to live like we're rejected and that we're cursed and that we're overlooked and that we don't really matter? But even in all of that, we have two stories where God stood up for Sarah in a big way. He was ready to destroy two nations for her safety. Didn't come to that, but God set himself up. Like, we have the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. We know what God can do. And God put a plague on Pharaoh's house and said, this could have gone a lot worse for you, Pharaoh. And then he put a plague on Abimelech's house and says, if you don't give her back, everyone that belongs to you is dead. Like, God was ready. He had all his firepower bearing down on them for Sarah. Like, that's what he was willing to do for Sarah. But it's not that he wasn't there, not that she couldn't trust him, but she didn't. She didn't lean on him, and that cost her through the course of her life. Sarah doubted, but God was protecting and caring for her. This is an important thing. Sarah doubted, but Sarah's doubt did not affect God's choice. I think a lot of times we have like this, if I'm not what God wants me to be, he's going to leave me behind. Now, we need to have faith. I mean, Sarah always had faith, but she doubted. Doubting God is going to work in the way he said he would work. Her doubt didn't affect God. God loved her anyway. God protected her anyway. God continued to choose her. God was with her throughout her life. But what we learn from this is that if we accept what God says about it, if we trust the promises of God and choose to lean on him, we can lean on him and live our life in joyful anticipation of the fulfillment of his promises. Like, we can live that way. See, one of the things we learn from this is, what is it like if you don't lean on God? Well, there's all this hardship, all these things, all this pain, all this tough life stuff. But we can learn from this. What if I decide I'm going to trust God? What if I decide I'm going to lean on God? I'm going to learn from this that God is my protector, and that God has chosen me, and that God keeps his promises, that God is faithful, that God sees me, and God hears me, and God preserves me. Even in Sarah's later in her life, God removed Hagar from her home. He removed that from her home so she could clearly be the mother of nations. That's what God chose her to be. But if we decide to, we can lean on God. We can trust him. And from the beginning of our life, we may not know. Like Sarah had an idea of what God was going to do. We don't need to have that idea. And Sarah proves it doesn't matter if you know or not. But we do have promises from God. We have been chosen by God. We live a life that is journeying without a home, waiting for a home, just like Sarah did. And we can put our faith in God. And if we do, then what will happen? It says, God turned Sarah's tears into laughter. And everyone who looks at me, they're going to laugh too. We don't have to wait to laugh. See, Sarah, in her life, she waited to laugh until she realized what God had been doing for her all along. But we don't have to wait to laugh. All of this sets the stage for something for us this morning. The message of the lesson is, don't wait to trust in God. Don't wait to see it to trust in God. Rather, trust in God today. Lean on God today. In Philippians chapter 4, this was our scripture reading, but we paint this whole picture in order to be able to read this verse with a little clearer understanding. So Philippians chapter 4, verse 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Laugh now. Don't live a life waiting to see what God is going to do, not trusting him. Live a life trusting in God and laugh today. Rejoice in the Lord always. again I will say, rejoice. Let your gentle spirit be known to all men. The Lord is near. You know, it's interesting. When God protected Sarah, it's because the Lord was near. Now, if you were taken by evil men to become part of their harem, I feel like if you were going to say, where's the Lord closest to me? That is not the place you would feel closest to the Lord. But the Lord was near there. The Lord was near Sarah. And you can be gentle, and you can be kind, and you can live in a certain way because the Lord is there. Lord is near you to protect you. Verse 6. Be anxious for nothing. Was Sarah anxious about children? Was that a source of constant pain in her life? Anxiety leads us to pain. Anxiety comes because I don't know what's going to happen next and I don't know what to do about it. That's what anxiety is. Trusting in God is learning to say, whatever happens next, I will be okay. See, be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. See, it doesn't say do nothing. What it says is turn to the Lord, lean on the Lord. Give your concerns to Him and take peace knowing that God will act on your behalf. Verse 7, and the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. See, this verse makes a lot more sense when we look at the life of Sarah Led. She was anxious. She didn't rejoice in the Lord. She waited until the promises were fulfilled, but we don't have to live that way. And we shouldn't live that way. We're Christians. Whatever promises Sarah had, we have better promises. Whatever assurance she had, we have better assurance. Whatever choice God made about her, He made a better choice for us. Whatever hope she had, and in 1 Peter or 2 Peter or 1 Peter 3, it says Sarah hoped in the promises of God. Whatever hope she had, we have better hope. And we know that the Lord is near and the Lord will care for us. The Lord hears our prayers. We have so much more confidence in that. And so my encouragement this morning is simply this. Let's not make the same mistake Sarah made, who unnecessarily suffered because she didn't lean on the Lord. Let us trust in the Lord and rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I'll say rejoice. If you're here this morning and you have some spiritual needs, I would just invite you to let those needs be made known as we stand.